Cool, so as I'm sure you all know by now, effective altruism is about doing the most good you can with the resources available to you. And one strategy that gets talked about a lot within EA is earning to give, which is, increasing the amount of money you have access to, which is one resource, so you can do more good with that. But working in and helping lead and helping to grow an organization is, I think, a way to grow most other resources that you have access to. So by doing that, you can grow the amount of time, talent, attention, energy that you have access to. So my hope is that this talk is relevant for anyone who might want to found a nonprofit, found a company, lead a team, grow a team, work in a team, any of that kind of thing. That's my hope. That said, I'm not focusing specifically on collaborating in small groups. So for the Berkeley students among you, I'm sorry, I wish I could tell you everything you need to know about how to do group projects painlessly, but I can't. The most I can wish you is professors who let you choose your groups, or at least give you a peer feedback form. With that, so one of the many things that drew me to GiveWell and Open Philanthropy when I started working with them a year ago was that it looked to me like those organizations were growing fast and growing thoughtfully. And I wanted to be able to observe that, I wanted to learn from it, I wanted to be a part of it, and that's what I'm hoping to talk about today. But with that said, I only joined a year ago, so I'm not a guru. I can't tell you everything that you need to know about management or growing an organization. So I'm going to share some observations and things that I've learned over the past year that I hope will be helpful. And I'm planning to leave time as well for you all to share your own observations or ask me about mine. And I should also clarify that none of this talk is GiveWell or Open Philanthropy's official take on any of this. It's all just my own personal observations and thoughts. So, when I started at GiveWell, about a week after I started, Ellie, one of the co-founders, said to me, do you want to go on a walk? Do you want to have a chat, get to know each other? So we went on a walk, and one of the things he asked me on this walk was, what's your least favorite thing about working at GiveWell so far? This is a pretty tough question when you've only been there a week and you're talking to the co-founder for one of the first sort of extended periods. So I thought for a while, and the best thing I could come up with was to say that there weren't enough SodaStream bottles. So we had a SodaStream machine in our kitchen, which converts normal water into sparkling water. And some staff had a SodaStream bottle on their desk, and they had their own SodaStream, and I couldn't find a bottle for me to use. And grave problems. And Ellie, we continued to chat. We went back to the office, and Ellie, 2 days later, came to me with SodaStream bottles that he'd immediately ordered after our conversation. And from then on, we've always had enough SodaStream bottles, even as our team has grown. So this is obviously a pretty trivial example of what I would claim is good management. But I think this particular story demonstrates three things about communicating openly that I think are really important. So the first thing it demonstrates is the importance of giving people lots of opportunities to communicate. So at GiveWell, for example, every week we have one-on-ones, which means that each staff member goes for a half-hour walk or sits down for half an hour with their direct manager. And this is just time to talk. One-on-ones is a pretty standard piece of management advice, but I want to repeat it because I think it's so great. It's just time to talk with the people you work with about what's on their mind, what they're worried about, maybe for them to give you feedback, for you to give them feedback, and so on. And as well as these weekly one-on-ones with your direct manager, at GiveWell, other senior staff also make it really easy to set up time to talk to them, and they try and keep a low bar, try and make people feel welcome to send them random emails or random chat messages, and really trying to keep the information flow going. The second thing I think this SodaStream story illustrates is the value of actively soliciting negative feedback. So this question, what's your least favorite thing about working here, really gave me an opening to bring up something negative that could be something small, like a SodaStream bottle, or something bigger. And I think it can be scary to bring up things like this, especially as a new employee, or especially if you don't know if the thing is actually a problem, or if you're not sure how you would solve it. And so I think questions like this, what's your least favorite thing question, or just making it clear in general that you are willing to hear what people have to say, even if it's negative, can be really valuable. And the third thing the SodaStream story shows is the value of following through or acting on what you hear. So the fact that Ellie immediately went back and went straight onto Amazon and bought more bottles shows that, even though the thing I said was pretty small, it was taken seriously, and it encouraged me to feel comfortable engaging more and spending time thinking about this kind of thing and then bringing it up when I did. So yeah, I think that SodaStream story, simple though it is pretty illustrative. In terms of communicating calibratedly, I think a good story that probably most people here are familiar with about how this can be done badly is the jokes you see on the internet about what it means when your girlfriend says, "Oh no, it's fine." I don't want to go into whether these jokes are accurate or blatantly sexist or some combination of the two, but I think it's just a fantastic example of badly calibrated communication. Because what happens is when someone says something and they don't mean sort of the typical common meaning of that word, you need to adjust, and you don't know quite how far to adjust. And so even though when you're working with people, there can be a real temptation to be nice, I do think it's really valuable to make an effort to keep the things you're saying really calibrated. And what that means is that when someone tells me something I did was fine, I know that it was fine. If they tell me that it was very good, I can feel good about it having been very good. And if they say it was just below expectations or way below expectations, I can take that at face value as well. And so this obviously comes up in the context of feedback and giving feedback, and I think that is a good use case. But I think it can be useful in other places as well. So I think, for example, when talking about your own work, if you're doing a research project and you've come up with some conclusions, I think it can be really useful to if you feel comfortable being clear which conclusions you feel really confident in and which conclusions you feel less confident in, or which conclusions maybe you think you might change your mind on if you put a little bit more work in. And anyone who's read much of the stuff that GiveWell or OpenPhil writes online will know that we use this style of calibrated communication in our external communication as well. So it turns out that if there's something you need done and you've done it before, then having a process that someone else can follow to do it is really pretty great. So just to take a simple example, if we want to recruit some summer interns, we've done that before a couple of years, done it for a couple of years. If we have a process sort of written down, then we can just hand that task to someone, they can follow the process, the job gets done, and that is great. But to show how this can go wrong, I'm going to use a hypothetical that might not be as probable as I wish it was. And you could imagine, for example, that 5 years from now, GiveWell has really taken off as an internship destination. Say, when Berkeley or Stanford students are thinking about their summer, they're really thinking Google, SpaceX, GiveWell. And you can imagine what might happen if this were the case is that people would put a very different amount of time into preparing for the interviews, for example, than they do right now. So if the process that we use right now to try and identify people who will really contribute to GiveWell and just find the people who were willing to pay for training they can get on the internet, or who knew people who'd interned at GiveWell before, for example. So obviously this is a bit of a whimsical example, but my point is that even though processes can save time, they can make things more consistent, and they can codify well-established practices, processes can also get out of sync with what they're trying to do. And if you have a bunch of processes that start to pile up and ossify, then you don't end up with an effectively functioning organization. Instead, you end up with the DMV. So I don't have a full solution for this, but I do think a good start is to actively keep this in mind and to actively remind the people that you work with that processes are designed to serve your principles and to serve your goals, and so that it should always be an option to just throw aside a process completely or to redesign it from scratch if it gets out of sync with what's going on. And I think if senior staff remind other people that processes they're following aren't the word of God, I think you've gone one step towards not letting things get ossified in a bad way. And I think passing tasks between people, giving people new work, if you can make it clear to the people why things are done the way they are done, that makes it possible for the people who have just taken on the work to keep an eye out for if the underlying circumstances happen to change, and they can change the processes as well to keep them in sync. So, in terms of growing capacity and increasing your ability to do things with more people, I'm thinking of this in the context of 3 facts that I think apply to every organization. One is that you need tasks done. Another is that you need the tasks done well. And a third is that you have incomplete information about the people on your staff and what they can do well and what they can do badly. And so there are two ways two extremes of how you could handle this, which both seem to be pretty clearly failure modes. One of them would be micromanaging or overmanaging. The example I think of is when I interned at a management consulting firm and I had to make a bunch of slides with organizational charts of who was working at the company, what their roles were, how they were connected. And my manager really wanted to check not just that I'd got the names right and the relationships correct, it was also very important to him that I'd chosen the right font size, the right shape and size of the boxes. And I think that was both a waste of his time and quite frustrating for me. And then on the other extreme, you have macromanaging or undermanaging, which is where you just throw someone right in the deep end. And I think this is something we've all experienced a version of. Maybe one example from college might be if a lecturer gives you a long lecture on the details of a theory, an abstract, and then hands you the problem set. You look at the problem set and realize you have no idea how you're supposed to go about doing it. So you go back home and figure that out sort of by yourself. And so I think both of these extremes are bad. The first, if you micromanage, it's a bad use of the manager's time and it's very frustrating for the employee. And if you undermanage, then it can lead to mistakes and it's also frustrating for the employee to not know how they're supposed to go about their work. And so I think something that I've seen at GiveWell that seems to me to be a pretty good way to handle this is to start out when you give someone a new project that you're not sure how they're going to do. To start out following them really quite closely. So checking in frequently, keeping an eye on what they do well, where they need guidance, where they're improving, and then gradually handing people more ownership over things that they can do well as you become confident that they can do it well. And I think this also is much easier, this style of following closely at first and then gradually handing off ownership. I think it's much easier if you're in an environment where there's a lot of open and calibrated communication. And I think the simplest way to demonstrate this, in GiveWell's case, is to tell you one of our dark secrets, which is that about 95% of our internal communication is done by emojis. So as my parting gift, I want to show you two of my favorite emojis, which I think are really useful for open and calibrated communication. This is the thumbs up, and then the other guy is what we call TMI, though we use it a little differently from the normal meaning. So the thumbs up, basically, if you send some piece of work to your manager, the thumbs up stands for approval. So you might send them what you've recently been working on and then your planned next steps. And they could, thumbs up that your next steps sound good. And so it gives them a chance to comment if they want to. But if they just do that thumbs up to what you've already prepared, then you're really maintaining ownership over the project and just giving them a chance to weigh in quite cheaply. And then TMI, likewise, can be used in the same situation. And the way we use that is to say, I don't want to object here, but I'm just basically deferring to your judgment. I haven't thought about this hard. You go, you do it, you've decided it's good. And so I think this is really, really useful to have these two options. I don't think that necessarily every organization needs these exact two emoji, but I think they're an example of making it simple to check in and to drive a project forward by yourself, but make it simple to go to others, whether you're a manager or other people who have more experience in this domain, and just quickly check in, do a quick sense check that it looks reasonable to them as well. And I think this kind of thing, so following people closely and then gradually handing them more ownership as facilitated by open and calibrated communication, I think this means that you can give people, gradually move towards giving people the hardest work that they can do. And so this both keeps the people you work with engaged, and it means that your organization can do more in the long run. So I've told you my story of how communicating openly and calibratedly, trying to avoid becoming the government, and growing capacity thoughtfully can be helpful in building organizations. Now I'd love to hear from you what you think, but first, thank you for listening and for coming.